Guess who called me today? I said to Pete. We were vegging on the couch. Who? He asked, taking a sip of his beer. Casey Watson. Really? He tore his eyes from the screen to give me a wry smile. Haven't heard you talk about her for a while. What's she on now? Husband number 4? 3. Pete grunted. She asked if we could put her up later this week while she's in town. Something about visiting her estranged mother who's in assisted living. What, she wants to stay with us? Just her? I nodded. Whatever, Pete said, turning back to the TV. What can it hurt? I pulled my legs away and sat up to stare at my husband. What, are you serious? I don't see why not. Pete, what about your project deadline? Won't you be busy? If it's just too much of a hassle for you... Come on, don't you pin this on me. Why don't you just say yes? You'll rack up some good karma points, and besides, it would be good for you to have a friend staying around for a while. You've been self-isolating again. Okay, I said, getting up. I'm not having this conversation right now. Pete shrugged. Suit yourself. I still think you should tell her yes, though. I rolled my eyes, picked up a book from the coffee table, and went to go read in bed. I was annoyed and a little hurt, but I knew Pete was right. By the time I was falling asleep, I had mostly talked myself into helping Casey out. I texted Casey the next day. She was ecstatic, insisting it would be like when we were roommates. I was dreading her visit. It wasn't that I hated Casey, not by any means, but we hadn't so much as talked in years. Plus, she had a history of coming on too strongly to married men, and I wasn't thrilled at the thought of her flirting with Pete. Casey arrived on Thursday with a stuffed suitcase and the inviting smile I remembered from our college days. Oh my God, it's so good to see you. Nell? I'm sorry it took me so long to come back. I should have stayed in touch. It's no big deal, Case, I said awkwardly, patting her back. I could have tried a little harder too. Casey pulled away to look at me. No, I totally get it. You've got a busy life. I think we all do. At this point, she glanced over my shoulder into the house. Is hubby here? I can't wait to meet him. He'll be home by 6. Come on in. I'll show you to your room. We spent the evening talking, and she was at times saying how she was jealous of my relationship with Pete, despite knowing next to nothing about us. Needless to say, this made me feel very uncomfortable, and later she insisted on helping with dinner, despite my protests. She carried on, laughing and reminiscing about the good old days, while I smiled and nodded. I was already exhausted, and I had 2 more days of this. Sunday couldn't come soon enough. When Pete came home, Casey's enthusiasm only increased. Pete had heard my many stories about Casey, her numerous boyfriends, the failed marriages, the multiple times she was the other woman, but they'd never met. Casey lavished Pete with attention. Halfway through dinner, I'd lost my appetite and was knee-deep in regret. You really caught a cute one, Casey said, dabbing at her ruby-painted lips with a napkin. My Jeremy isn't nearly as cute as you, but what he lacks in looks, he makes up for in the bedroom. She winked at Pete. I almost opened my mouth to tell Casey off, but Pete raised an eyebrow at me and I sighed. Yeah, Pete's a great guy, I said, moving my fork around my plate listlessly. Smart, sweet, and yeah, I guess he's pretty cute. Pete and Casey laughed, and the conversation resumed. I did my best to try and grin and bear it, and at the least, the two seemed to be having an enjoyable night. Friday was much the same. I spent some quality one-on-one time with Casey, going out to our old favourite restaurant for lunch and chatting over drinks. I don't know if it was the wine or just the familiarity, but I actually began to enjoy myself a little bit. And trust me, I never forgot how manipulative Casey could be, or how easily she could spin the truth, but she was undeniably kind of fun to be around. My comfort around her wouldn't last long, however. During after-dinner drinks that night, I began to notice something strange. Pete was talking to Casey less. He was asking fewer questions, not engaging nearly as much, and I caught him throwing odd glances her way. Something in his face read mistrust. All the same, Casey chatted her way through the evening, amiably, her ever-bubbly self. As we went off to bed for the night, I couldn't help but notice that Pete's good night to Casey was quite cold, almost scornful. In the morning, Pete kissed me on the forehead as usual, before running out of the door to the office. The big project he had due next week unfortunately meant that Saturday was another work day for him. I woke up a little bit later to find a piece of paper next to my pillow. Blearily, I sat up and read the note scrawled therein. We need to talk. Make sure you're not around Casey. The note had me on edge a little bit as Casey and I drank our coffee alongside a light breakfast. She wasn't acting unusual in any way, so I wasn't exactly sure what bomb Pete was going to drop on me. After we ate, Casey headed out to visit her mum, and I took the opportunity to call Pete. "Hey, babe," he said upon answering. "Hey, yourself, what's with the note? Did you give Casey my phone number?" I sat down at the coffee table in the kitchen and took a sip of lukewarm coffee. "No, why would I?" "I don't know, but she got it somehow." "Weird. She's been texting you or something?" "Yeah. It started yesterday. It started off normal, thanking me for letting her stay, etc., but it got weird. She began implying that there was some kind of, sexual agreement between us." "What? Are you serious?" "Yeah, and they've just been getting worse." "I can't believe her. After we put her up, this is... I can't believe it." "I'll show you tonight. I think it would be best if we confront her." "Oh, okay. All right. We'll get it sorted out," Pete soothed. "I love you. I love you too." I tried to keep my cool until Pete got home. When Casey returned from her visit, I made up excuses to leave her on her own. I went to Pete's home office and shut myself in, spending at least an hour scouring Casey's Facebook page for signs that she was cracking. When Pete got home, I heard him brush off Casey's greeting. He came into the office and shut the door behind him. "She's escalating the messages," he said. His face was pale, and seeing him appear at odds like this made my skin prickle. "She started to suggest some pretty dark stuff. I think we should ask her to leave." "Let me see, I want to know exactly what she's been saying." Pete unlocked his phone and handed it to me. His jaw was clenched tight as he watched me pull up the messages. I read through them with horror growing and disgust. "Meet me in the basement after dinner. I've been waiting so long. I have something far tastier for you than her dry roast. I know you don't really love her. Let's leave together tonight." I could get something to poison her dinner, but a knife would be faster. "I love you, Pete. I want to be with you forever, whatever the cost." I finished reading, my mouth hanging open while tears blurred my vision. "Are we in trouble, Pete?" "No," Pete assured me, though he avoided my eyes as he said it. "She's probably not dangerous. Let's just go ask her about it." Taking a deep breath, I followed Pete to the living room. Casey wasn't there. We heard a clanking from the kitchen and turned to find Casey standing there with a knife in her hand, and she was smiling. "Hey, hope you don't mind. Thought I'd start on dinner while you two were busy." She went to the counter where a peeled onion was sitting on the cutting board, and she started dicing. Pete and I exchanged glances. "Case, we need to talk," I began. "Would you mind putting the knife down?" Casey did as I asked, and gave me a puzzled look. "What's up?" "It's the text messages," Pete said, crossing his arms. "They need to stop, immediately, or we're going to have to ask you to leave. Or we're going to call the cops." Casey's eyes widened. "I don't know what you're talking about." She looked at me. What text messages?" "Don't play dumb, Casey," I replied coldly. "I read them all. I know what you've been saying, what you're planning. I don't..." "No, let's not draw this out." "Show her, Pete." Pete brought up the messages and handed her the phone. She nervously took it and read. "Oh my gosh, good lord. Guys, I didn't write these, that's not even my number." "What?" Pete said. "But the first message you asked, you thanked me for letting you stay over." "Why are you denying this, Casey? I know about your history. I know you're sleeping with Bobby Crichton while he was dating Maria. You kind of set the precedent for yourself, don't you think?" I expected Casey to defend herself further. Instead, her eyes fell to the phone still in her hand. Guys, you should see this." Pete took the phone, and I read it over his shoulder. Icy fingers danced down my spine. "The other one is cute, but I want you all to myself. And I always get my way. I need to be with you tonight, Pete. Don't make me wait, or I'll kill them both." "Oh my god, who?" Pete gripped my shoulder and stared just beyond the kitchen. "Have we checked the basement lately?" "No," I whispered in response. "Why would we need to?" The clicking of the doorknob turning startled all of us, and we watched as the basement door swung open. A thin woman wearing a torn, dirty red cocktail dress emerged, hunched over and staring intensely at the three of us. Her lips were cracked and smeared with blood. "I have been waiting long enough, Pete. We're going to be together now." She smiled grotesquely, and in one hand she held a cell phone, and in the other, a ball pen hammer. "Monica? What the hell are you doing here?" Pete demanded, as his eyes widened with horror. What the fuck are you doing in my house?
You said I could stay any time, Pete. You promised. Are you going back on your promise, Pete?
Her eyes glistened and tears ran down her dirt-smeared cheeks. Monica. She was Pete's manager. I was completely at a loss as I watched this woman I had known for 3 years twitch like a feral animal. Her typically composed hair was a rat's nest and her bare feet were filthy. She brought with her a pungent smell of piss mixed with standing water.
Pete, do something,
I begged, holding on to his elbow tightly. Monica, it's okay, we can figure this out. 1 second, just wait 1 second. Don't do anything rash, please. But it was clear that anger and hurt had already poisoned her mind. She twisted her mouth into a snarl and suddenly rushed at me, hammer raised high above her head. I didn't have enough time to react rationally, and only cowered with my eyes squeezed shut, hoping that Pete would protect me. I opened my eyes to find that Casey had picked up the kitchen knife and stabbed Monica in the ribcage. She withdrew the knife quickly and raised her arm to strike again. Monica howled with pain and dropped the hammer. She twisted out of Casey's next attack and scrambled back, clutching her wound. Pete dived for the hammer and Monica's eyes darted between the three of us, weighing the situation. Her eyes fell on me at last, narrowed and hateful. There was a darkness in them that I'd never seen before. I staggered back, afraid that she would dart at me, but instead she twitched her way back and bolted for the door, her red, ragged dress fluttering behind her. She disappeared into the night, leaving us utterly stunned. After the police interviewed us and took pictures of the basement, they gave us some bad news, that Monica was nowhere to be found. Her apartment was vacant, and she'd somehow covered her tracks well enough to avoid detection by the police dogs. Apparently, her apartment contained some evidence of her growing obsession with my husband, photos that were taken without Pete's knowledge, personal information about both of us, and even a detailed weekly schedule of Pete's day-to-day. Pete helped us put together the pieces of Monica's final mental break. She had told Pete and his co-workers that she was going to take a quick impromptu vacation that Thursday. The reality was that she had become so consumed by jealousy when Pete mentioned that we were having a house guest. Pete thought her pouting response that he never invited her over was odd, but brushed it aside with an empty promise that she could come over any time that she'd like. She'd taken him at his word quite literally. Monica had somehow gotten into the house and holed up in our unfinished basement. Down there, the police found a phone charger, a bucket of excrement, a few dirty personal effects, and a crude table setting put together with old furniture and some items she'd squirreled away while everyone was gone or asleep. It was like some seriously twisted version of Lady and the Tramp. We apologised profusely to Casey, but she laughed it off gracefully, despite the trauma of the night. She and Pete are asleep now, somehow. I've been writing this all night because even with the cops watching, how the hell am I supposed to sleep knowing that Monica is still out there? Especially after I'd seen that cold, unfathomable evil in her eyes. It's Casey's last night visiting, and I'll admit it's comforting to have her here. She actually invited us to Florida to stay with her and her new husband for as long as we wanted. Casey, who I begrudgingly let stay in our home, who I hadn't talked to in so long, and who I accused of such terrible things. Casey, who stabbed a deranged would-be murderer in my defence. Yeah, you bet your ass we're going to Florida tomorrow. Besides, I think Casey and I have more catching up to do.